Room 13, Chapter 9. They got back in plenty of time for tea, which was egg, chips and sausages, with Swiss roll and ice cream for pudding. Afterwards, everybody went upstairs to put on tracksuits and trainers. Mrs. Marriott was taking them for a game of rounders on the sands. Lisa would be missing out because of the apologies she had to write. Gary Buzzard's room was one floor below Fliss's, number 7. When she came down the stairs, he was standing in the doorway, showing something to a group of his friends, who were making admiring noises. As Fliss passed, he called out, "How about this, Fliss?" She glanced in his direction. He was holding up the biggest stick of rock she'd ever seen. She didn't like him much, and would have loved to walk on with her nose in the air, but the pink stick really was enormous, nearly a metre long and about 4 centimetres thick. She stopped. "Where the heck did you get that from?" she asked in what she hoped was a scornful voice. "Shop on the quay, £1.50. No one saw me because I stuck it down my jeans leg." His friends gasped and chuckled at his daring. Fliss pulled a face. "You're nuts. £1.50? I won't give you 50p for it." "You wouldn't get chance. It'll rot your teeth, so there. You're only jealous. I'm not. I hope Mr. Hepworth catches you and hits you on the head with it." It was a good game of rounders. It was more fun than it might have been because the tide was coming in and the strip of sand they were playing on grew narrower and narrower. People kept hitting the ball into the sea, and some of the fielders had to play barefoot so that they could retrieve it. Finally, the pitch became so restricted that play was impossible. They wrapped up the game, retreated to the top of one of the concrete buttresses and protected the foot of the cliff and sat, watching the tide come in. Cocoa and biscuits were served in the lounge at 8:30. The children sat sipping and munching while twilight fell outside and Mrs. Evans read them a story. Lisa came down with her written apologies. Mr. Hepworth read them, nodded and gave her back a torch. It was 9 o'clock, bedtime. Fliss was tired, but she couldn't sleep. It was fun at first, lying in the dark, talking with Marie and the twins, but one by one they drifted off to sleep and she was left listening to the muffled noises that rose from the boys' room below. After a while these two stopped, and then there was only the occasional creak and the rhythmic shush of the sea. She lay staring at the ceiling, waiting for her eyes to get tired. If the lids grew heavy enough they'd close, and then she'd drift off. She wouldn't even know she was lying in the dark, and when she woke up it would be morning, and the first night, the worst night, would be over. Phantom lights swam across her field of vision, lazily like shoals of tiny fish. She watched them, but they failed to lull her, and presently it came to her that she would have to go to the bathroom. She listened. If somebody else was awake somewhere it would be easier. A boy on the floor below perhaps, or one of the teachers. She looked at her watch. 23:56. 4 minutes to midnight. Surely somebody was still about. The Wilkinsons locking up for the night, or Mr. Hepworth making a final patrol? Silence. In all the world only Fliss was awake. She listened to the steady breathing of the other 3 girls. Why couldn't one of them have been a snorer? If somebody had been snoring she could have given them a shake. A policeman going by outside would be better than nothing. His footsteps might make her feel safe. But there was no policeman. There wasn't even a car. The bed creaked as she sat up and swung her legs out. She listened. Nothing. The steady breathing continued. She hadn't disturbed anybody. Perhaps she'd have to put the light on to find the door. That would wake them too. But no, there was moonlight and the curtains were thin and she could see quite clearly. It would be most unfair to wake them with the light. She stood up and crept towards the door. There was sand in the carpet. A floorboard creaked and she paused. Hopefully. One of the twins stirred, mumbling, and Fliss whispered, "Maureen? Joanne?" But there was no response. She opened the door a crack and looked out. The only illumination came from a small window on the half landing below. It was minimal. She could make out the dark shapes of the doors but not the pattern on the carpet. The air had a musty smell and felt cold. As she hesitated for a moment in the doorway, peering into the gloom and listening, she became aware of a faint sound. The snuffling, grunting noise of somebody snoring beyond the door of room 11. She found it oddly reassuring and crossed the landing quickly in case it should stop. Recrossing a minute later with the hiss of the toilet cistern in her ears, she could still hear it. It seemed louder and was accompanied now by a thin whimpering noise like crying. Fliss pulled a face. Somebody feeling homesick? Not Lisa, surely. The idea that her friend might be in distress made her forget her fear for a moment. She took a couple of steps towards room 11, unsure of what she intended to do. As she did so, she became aware that the noise was not coming from that room at all, but from the one next to it. The cupboard. Her eyes flicked to its door. On it, visible in the midnight gloom, was the number 13. She recoiled, covering her mouth with her hand. When she had asked Mrs. Marriott what lay beyond that door, there had been no number on it. She knew there hadn't. Yet there it was, 13. And somebody was in there. Somebody or something. She backed away. The hissing of the cistern dwindled and ceased. The other sounds continued, and now the whimpering was more persistent, and the snuffling had a vicious quality to it, like a pig rooting in mud. She retreated slowly, holding her breath. When she reached the doorway of her own room, she backed through it, feeling for the doorknob and keeping her eyes fixed on the door of room 13. Once inside, she closed the door quickly, crossed to her bed, and lay staring at the ceiling, while spasms shook her body. Much later, when the shivering had stopped and she was drifting to sleep, she thought she heard stealthy footsteps on the landing. But when she woke at 7 with the sun in her face and her friend's excited chatter in her ears, she wondered whether she might have dreamed it at all. Chapter 10. They gathered in the lounge after breakfast. Mr. Hepworth had fixed a large map of the coast to the wall. He pointed. Here's Whitby, where we are, and here, he slid his finger northward along the coastline, is Staithes, where the coach will drop us this morning. Staithes used to be an important fishing port like Whitby, and there are still a few fishermen there, but it is a quiet village now. Captain Cook worked in a shop at Staithes when he was very young, before he decided to be a sailor. Will we be going in the shop, sir? No, Neil Atkinson, we will not. Unfortunately, it was washed away by the sea a long time ago. However, if we are very lucky, we might see a ghost. There were gasps and explanations at this. Captain Cook's ghost, sir? Asked James Garside. The teacher shook his head, smiling. No, James, not Captain Cook's, a young girl's. There's a dangerous cliff at Staithes, a crumbling cliff, and the story goes that when this girl was walking under it one day, a chunk of rock fell and decapitated her. Who knows what decapitated means? Yes, Stephen. Sir, knocked her cap off, sir? No, Michelle Webster. Squashed her, sir? Closer, but not right. Ellie Mae Sunderland. Knocked her head off, sir? Correct. He leaned forward, peering at the girl through narrowed eyes. Are you all right, Ellie Mae? You look a bit pasty. Yes, sir. Sure? Yes, sir. Right. Well, there's a bridge over a creek at Staithes, and that's where the headless ghost has been seen. We'll be having a look round the village, then walking along the cliff-top path to Runswick Bay. That's here. He jabbed at the map again. A boy raised his hand. What is it, Robert Field? How far is it, sir? The teacher shrugged, smiling. A few miles. We'll find somewhere to eat our packed lunches on the way, and the coach will be waiting at Runswick to bring us back here. Right, it's a lovely sunny morning, so let's get started. Lisa saved Fliss a seat on the coach. As they roared along the coast road, she said, We stayed awake ever so late in our room last night, talking, telling jokes and that. It was brilliant. You were all asleep before midnight, though, said Fliss. How do you know? I passed your door at midnight. There wasn't a sound. What were you doing passing our door at midnight? I went to the toilet, or at least I think I did. How do you mean you think you did? Don't you know? Fliss pulled her face. No, it's all mixed up with this horrible dream I had. What was it about, your dream? Fliss told her friend about the strange noises that had seemed to come from the linen cupboard, the number 13 on the door, the footsteps she thought she heard. It all seemed so real, Lisa, but then this morning I looked, and of course there was no number on the door, and the sun was shining, and everybody was shouting and messing about on the landing, and it didn't seem real anymore. Do you know what I mean? Lisa nodded. Sure, it was all a dream. You didn't go to the toilet, and you weren't outside our door at midnight, so you don't know what time we went to sleep, right? Right, except what, Fliss? What is it? After the toilet, I dreamed I washed my hands, right? And it was one of those spurty taps where the water comes all at once and goes everywhere. Some went on the floor. Quite a lot, in fact. There didn't seem to be anything to mop it up with. And anyway, I was too scared to hang about, so I left it. Lisa shrugged. Dream water in a dream bathroom, so what? Fliss looked at her friend. It was still there this morning, she said.